Stathis Karapanos joins me now for a conversation on his career as a flutist, and today in particular, his recent album Hindemith, Complete Works for Flute. Thank you for the call, Stathis. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm great. How are you?
I am doing great as well. All right, so what is it about the music of Hindemith that you find personally compelling, and to the extent that you designated all this time and space for quite the extensive presentation of his flute works?
Well, yes, it was over 5 years it took to complete this album. And honestly, in the beginning, the first times I saw his compositions, I had to play them. I was really confused and baffled as to how I have to go about them. It sounded just very, very strange. And I think the reason for this whole album is because it just opened up a whole new world in front of me, which really another universe. Of course, also then diving into his story and into his life, which was an amazing one and a particularly difficult one, I think. He had immense difficulties in terms of he was drafted in the First World War, so he served, and then later on he was banned. His music was banned by the Nazis, and he had to flee because his wife was in fact Jewish, and that's why I think he fled to Switzerland, and then he went to the States, where of course he worked at Yale, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting that you describe the experience of listening as a little bit confusing at first. Do you feel like as you performed it and you became more and more familiar, are there certain aspects of the music that came to light for you?
Absolutely, this is the experience that many people have with this music, especially because it often gets treated such like aleatoric, stupid, kind of non-music, and I think that I think that it's important to remember his roots and to remember how classical all of his style of writing is. You can see that also in his own books for analysis. I think that it's been very wronged. I think it's been very wronged. It's usually also when you usually show a child or play a child a melody or a piece of music, and when they're confused, is usually a very bad sign, either about the music or about a performance. But yeah, it's one of the few times in my life where I've had such a 180 degrees turn in my in experiencing. Yeah.
One thing that captured my attention from his story is not only being a composer of music for professional musicians, but also amateur musicians. If you want to talk a little bit more about that, and even maybe your own perspective on the role of amateur musicians in the current classical culture.
Well, I think it's so wonderful to be in a setting like, for example, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland. There's an example. Of course, many other countries have that too. But there is a large tradition of people actually playing instruments at quite a high level for just to make music without pursuing it professionally. And there's so many amateur orchestras and so many. Also, I heard recently that the doctors' unions have orchestras, yes, in different states in Germany, and I think this is really incredible. It's an incredible tradition, which I really hope continues because it helps nurture and continue the legacy also of music, which oftentimes gets lost between elitism and this and that. I think it's a great initiative.
Could you talk a little bit about his use of quotation and some of the inspiration he drew from earlier eras? I understand in some of the flute pieces on this album, there are even some Baroque forms that make their way into it.
Well, there are many. There are Baroque forms. There's jazz, partly. There are many blue chords, and jazzy stuff. There is also a quotation of the Wedding March in the Concerto for Five Instruments in the last movement. it is basically the whole time the wedding march. It was a gift from him to his wife, and it's the clarinet plays that all the time. It's the whole concerto is fantastic because it's very, quirky and fun and very beautiful also at times. But the third movement is so, when you focus on listening to the clarinet, it just becomes really so fun.
Are there any particular pieces that you would like to highlight for us from this album? There's a lot there.
I mean, there's so much subtle humor and so much. It's a big universe. I mean, there's a small piece which is called Echo for flute and piano, and it's just, it's kind of like a joke in a way. I'm really fascinated by his musical language, which changes so much.
Are there any upcoming projects or things that you'd like us to keep an eye out for you in the near future?
Well, we've recorded now a new concerto by Michael Shapiro, which he wrote for me, and we recorded it with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in London. Another composer with a very, very fine language, and also the concerto is very, very different than what you'd expect from a flute concerto. He utilizes it in a very, he shows all kinds of extremities in all sorts of ways. It's called In the Light of the Sun, and it's wonderful, really. It's a great composition. And the next thing that's coming up are the complete works of Krzysztof Penderecki for flute. Another usually not so easy listening composer, but very much like Hindemith, incredible beauty. Once you start to to take care of the subtleties and yeah.
I've been speaking with Stathis Karapanos on the album Hindemith Complete Works for Flute. Stathis, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for having me on.